Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to ICoF Census 2020 Funder Webinar. This is Carrie McCann-Botel, President of the Iowa Council of Foundations. Thanks for joining us today to learn about the importance of the upcoming Census 2020 count. We started this conversation as a topic at our October quarterly membership meeting, and there was interest from several ICoF members in continuing the conversation, so that will be our goal for the day. During today's call, we will hear from 3 colleagues sharing information about their work. Our goals are to learn about state resources, research, and tools available to help support your understanding of the Census 2020 count, identify leaders in Iowa who are working on Census 2020 outreach and engagement in their communities, discover strategies that are being implemented by fellow funders that may work in your community, and to ask questions and share any additional needs that you have related to this topic. On our call today, we will hear from Gary Krob, coordinator of the State Data Center at the State Library of Iowa. Gary will share general information about the census and its impact on the state, as well as a resource that you can access on their website to learn more. Then we will hear from Dave Geenen, Executive Director, and Laura Fontaine, Program Officer and Community Engagement and Strategic Initiatives, both with the Doris and Victor Day Foundation. They will share information on why this is an important issue for funders and philanthropy, how they have been supporting their work locally, and resources to help support your own engagement. Please use the chat box function on your webinar screen to submit any questions you have throughout the webinar, and I will relay those to our presenters. I have muted everyone's line so we can avoid background noise. And with that, I will go ahead and turn things over to our first speaker, Gary.
Okay. I just want to say thank you for having me online today. I appreciate any opportunity I have to talk about the census data and the census programs that are out there right now. My name is Gary Krob, and I'm the coordinator for the State Data Center, which is part of the State Library of Iowa. And really just going to touch on just a couple topics today that might be of assistance to you. The first is really, the services I provide here in state government, as well as to the general public, and then also what's coming up and what's down the pipeline for the 2020 census. So ultimately, what the State Data Center program is, it's actually a federal-state cooperative program between each of all 50 states and the federal government. So like every state has a state data center. I think everyone does now. Michigan didn't for a little bit, but they do now. And really, our role is to help you all find data about our states. Census Bureau can't answer every single request out there for all the citizens in the nation, and so they wanted subject matter experts in each state, which is where we come in. We help you find what's out there. We tell you what's good data, what's bad data, and then answer questions as needed. We also try to, and that's kind of what we're doing today, is advocating for the policies to improve census data about Iowa, but also just to increase awareness about the census. So what do I do? This kind of sums it up for the most part. A lot of the stuff I provide are facts online. I have a website, which I'll show briefly, that has a lot of data about Iowa cities and Iowa counties and Iowa school districts, some census tract data. And then I spend a lot of time answering data requests, doing some data mapping. I create statistical profiles for different communities in our state. Each year I look at, like the next one that will be coming out will be this month, will be African Americans in Iowa. It's something I update every year. So there's like 8 or 9 profiles that I look at. I look at African Americans, women in Iowa, older Iowans, the Asian Pacific Islander population, things like that. And they're just 4-page PDF profiles that kind of look at those population groups, how they're represented in our state, how that representation has maybe changed over time. And then the last 2 are kind of, I won't say the more important ones, but much more the discussion kind of topics where we sit down or we over the phone or via email talk about data. What's out there, what's good to use, what's maybe bad to use, what's available to you. That's a good chunk of my time as well. So that's in a very quick nutshell, that's what I do. But primarily what you all are interested in, what you're wanting to know about is the Census 2020. And that is something that is heavily on the Census Bureau's mind. They've been in the planning process for this probably for the last, I think the first time we started talking about it would have been in 2013 is when we started to kind of just, pretty much after the 2010 it was getting over with and all the products were released, it's time to start looking at the 2020 census. And so, I probably preaching to the choir, but just so I get it out of the way, what is the 2020 census? What is the decennial census? And that is, what it says up there is just the population count in the United States, all the island areas. And it counts everyone, gets their ages, race, ethnic groups, both citizens and non-citizens, and it is required by the U.S. Constitution. This is the proposed 2020 census content. The Census Bureau had to get the content topics to Congress last year by February, I believe. I believe it's February or March of this year. They have to have approved by Congress the actual wording of the questions. You'll see on there all the same questions that were on 2010, except for the citizenship question, which you'll see a little asterisk. And that is because, as I'm sure you're aware, that is a proposed new question by the administration to add a question on citizenship. Actually, just today, the New York courts ruled that was that question should not be asked. There are two other court cases, one in California, one in Maryland. I believe the one in New York was a multi-state one. That actually Iowa was part of a multi-state lawsuit to not require citizenship on the U.S. Census. So it was, good news as far as that right now, but obviously that decision will be appealed eventually. I'm assuming it will be heard by the Supreme Court, who will have to weigh in on whether or not the Census Bureau can ask a question on citizenship. So I still include it in the slide because I believe the Bureau has to move forward, assuming it'll be on there until they're told they don't have to have it on there. So, but you'll see here, age, sex, race, Hispanic origin, household relationship, basically. So you fill out the form, and who's ever in your house, how are they related to you, whether they're relatives, non-relatives, et cetera. And then they also ask a question on tenure, which is whether or not you own or rent your home. That's all that's asked in the decennial census. Anything else, data-wise, that comes from the Census Bureau, it comes from what's called the American Community Survey. So the decennial no longer asks questions on income or poverty or employment status or educational attainment. That all comes on an annual basis from the American Community Survey. So why is the 2020 important? There's a couple, actually, in my mind, there's lots of reasons, but I'm just going to kind of touch on a couple here. The first is, it's really how we draw or we determine our representation both in federal government, so House of Representatives and the Senate, so how many representatives we have in Congress. But it's also how we use it to draw our lines here in the state as far as our district lines for voting districts and whatnot. So to have an accurate count is really important for us to know not only the number of people but also the makeup of the population, so that we can make sure that we draw our lines as fairly as possible. The other big reason really big reason for the census is money. This is I'm going to show a slide here in a second that has some information from George Washington University, but Iowa gets about $5.3 billion annually from the census. In federal funding that's allocated for just a couple different topics of how it's funded. Again, the next slide will kind of show you the specifics, some of the specifics. So it's really important for us for federal funding, but it's also very important for us because there's a lot of state funding that the state uses population for in order to determine who gets the money and where the money needs to go, that they have to make sure all Iowans are covered for specific legislations and whatnot. This is a slide. I don't know how well y'all can see it. I have it on my website, so we can look at it. I can show it to you there too as well. But this is something George Washington University did, I think, in 2015, if I'm remembering right. And they just looked at the amount of federal dollars each state got, and looked at the number of the big programs, the biggest programs. But then basically broke out by population, how much each state got annually from the federal government. And Iowa gets about $1,700 a year annually per citizen. So if the census is not conducted properly or people don't respond to the census, whether they're either afraid to or they just don't think the government should be involved in their business, that's $1,700 each year less that the state gets, $1,700 less each community gets over the course of 10 years, because this count is what we're going to go on from 2020 to 2030. It's going to be the base for our state for the next 10 years. So having an accurate 2020 census is really vital for us, both for representation but also for the dollars. Again, I'm kind of rushing through this real quick because I know there's much more important probably topics to talk about than what I do and what's out there. But I just wanted to show you a couple quick slides. First, this is just my homepage, the URL, that's very important up there, iowadatacenter.org. And then the next slide is the 2020 census page, and that's what I'm going to show you here real quick. But I always like to include at least a screenshot that it has a URL, so just in case something didn't work, you at least have that information. So I am going to share my screen, my desktop real quick, and just wanted to kind of show you real quick the State Data Center website. Two important things for us today to talk about. One is going to be this data tab. I'm not going to show you how to find the data on my site. That would take another half hour, 45 minutes. We don't have that time, but I will just point out that the top folder over here that says data, if you click on that and you navigate through some folders, you can get some interactive reports. So if you were looking for data for specific areas, counties, cities, school districts, as I mentioned, that's where you're going to go to find the decennial data, as well as the American Community Survey data, the population estimates that's released each year. That kind of things are released there. But what I want to show you today is the 2020 census link. You can either click on this folder that says 2020 census or the little orange button over here that says 2020. Either one will do it. And it takes you to the landing page. And what we have over here and what's important, the reason I'm getting this information out now, is there's a lot of good information to get people engaged, to get people understanding understanding that it's coming, what the census is, why it's important, and then really what they can do to help ensure that there's a good census count in our state. Broken out pretty simply why it's important. So if you ever need to talk to somebody and they want to know, why is the 2020 census important, if you click on that link, again, either the button or the actual title, it'll take you to a page that explains the importance of the 2020 census. Really just goes in a little bit more detail than what I just told you about, and that's where I believe you would get the use of the census data, this little $5.3 billion to Iowa. If you click on that, that's where you get the George Washington University spreadsheet. It's a PDF file. You can download it and share it with people. Again, it just kind of breaks up the top 15, I believe, funding sources of federal dollars for Iowa. The next thing I want to talk about is how hard to count areas. These are areas that the Census Bureau has determined via a couple different criteria. They'll look at poverty rates, they'll look at certain race data, they'll look at employment statistics, things that they've identified that can kind of contribute to whether or not a person will or will not respond to the decennial census. This will give you, if you click on this, kind of just explains what a hard to count area, what a non-response rate is, and then there's a couple of mappers here that you can use to look at a specific area. You can look at the state. You can drill down to a city, a neighborhood, to kind of find out anywhere in your area where are those places that have population groups that are less likely to respond to the census, and so you can identify the areas that maybe need a little bit more attention, little areas that you may want to talk to city leaders, to civic members, to kind of get the community engaged in the 2020 census. Timeline program reviews, that's mainly administrative if you want to know where things are at in the Census Bureau as far as preparations up to 2020, how soon will 2020 start, that's where you would go. The last two things here, the questionnaire button here at the back, the questionnaire, since they haven't had the questions approved yet by Congress, we don't have a questionnaire to share. But once the questionnaire is available, that's where you can look at to see a sample of what it will look like. The bottom two jobs, census jobs and the complete count committees, are also very, very important to us right now. Census jobs, the census will be hiring people within the state of Iowa to work on the 2020 census, both as in administrative positions, working in the couple census offices that they'll have in our state, but also as enumerators, people who will go around and have people help people fill out their census forms, go door to door. They don't want to do too much of that because this will be the first decennial that has a online component, and they're really hoping a majority of the population will respond online because it will cut costs drastically if they can do that. But there will be a number of census jobs available in Iowa. As they come across my desk, I will be putting them on this site, on this link. So if you click on the census job, it'll list, the different positions. There's only a few open right now. There's a partnership specialist for Lynn Jones or Benton County. They're looking for somebody in Story County and Polk County. The Bureau is going to be looking for a lot of help from the state in finding applicants. Low unemployment's a great thing unless you're looking to hire a lot of people. Then it's a little harder. So they're struggling at the moment to get some positions filled, and they're concerned that will continue through the 2020. And then the last thing is complete count committees, which is really where I think you all come in, and on local community levels, but also on a state level. These are committees that are set up by cities. They can be set up by counties. It can be set up by there can be a statewide complete count committee. The state of Iowa has not committed yet to setting up a statewide. Well, I shouldn't say that. They're receptive. I was in a meeting with the Census Bureau staff and the governor's staff, and the governor's staff is open to doing it. They just couldn't commit until after session got going, which is this week, and the budget stuff is kind of out the door. So I think they promised that they would revisit the topic later this month. So I'm hopeful that the state will have some form of a complete count committee. But I guarantee you, there's a partnership specialist in Iowa, and he's gone around to a lot of cities in Iowa and has talked to a lot of communities, and there's a lot of places that are already establishing local census complete count committees. And really, this kind of explains what it is. I'm just throwing that word out there. You probably don't know what it is, or maybe you do, but if you want more information, you can click on that. But really what it is just getting groups of people in a community together discussing what's going on in the census, what the local communities, the groups can do in the area to help ensure that we get a complete count in our state. It's gathering people from a community, from a city, from a state, county, et cetera, that has an interest in ensuring that we have a complete count committee, and that can then turn around and go and talk to their groups and encourage their members to participate in the census. So it's getting members of the Latino community together in a room with members of the Des Moines Catholic organization in the room, getting people together with the Des Moines Partnership. I'm speaking Des Moines just because that's where I'm at. But getting those people all in one room together, sharing information about what's going on, what's coming down the pipeline, how they can help, what they need to do so that they can then turn around and talk to their members and say, hey, it's coming. It's really important we fill this out. Here's the information I have. Do you have any questions? What can we do to make sure we get everyone, responding to the census? I think, like I said, the questionnaire is not done. There's some contact information here for the Iowa's in the Chicago regional office. So if you ever needed to talk to them, there's that information. But then there's my name, contact information here as well. But along those lines, if I go back to the slide, really, besides that little live demonstration, the most important thing I have for you is this slide here, and that's my contact information. If you ever need anything, if you have any questions, not just about the decennial, but about the ACS or about population estimates and programs, just anything dealing with the Census Bureau, census data, you feel free to contact me, my phone or email. Email obviously is better for me just because I don't want to be on the phone all the time. but my job here is to help you all find data, use data, and understand how that data can work for you. So that's all I have. I don't know if there was any other questions, or if we want to wait till the end for that stuff.
Thanks, Gary. I didn't have any questions come in, but I was curious, back on the Complete Count Committee page on your website, if you click into that link, is there a detail of the communities in Iowa that have already formed Complete Count Committees, or is that maybe a list that we could get from you for our funders that might be located in those areas?
I don't have a list yet, but I can send the partnership specialist that we have in Iowa is Kelly Campbell. I worked with Kelly. This will be almost my third. I came in the middle of 2000 third census, and Kelly worked. He was a partnership specialist in 2010, so he's quite familiar with the state, and he did this, obviously 10 years ago. So he's on the road a lot. He's talking to a lot of people. I haven't got a list from him yet, but I can definitely reach out and see if I can get one from him, and then share it.
Okay, that would be really helpful, and I can pass that along to folks on the webinar and really our full membership, because those would be great tables for our funders to be sitting at and conversations for them to be involved in. So would appreciate that.
Not a problem.
All right, very good. Well, we'll go ahead and turn things over to Dave and Laura, and if we have any questions at the end, Gary will ask you back on.
Okay.
Thanks. All right.
Well, hello.
And Dave and Laura, go away.
Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for having us come here. I tell you what, this is a historic moment here at the Day Foundation. It's my first time anyone has ever asked us to do anything about leading a webinar. I feel like this is worthy for a grandma to get a note home to brag to her church lady friends on Wednesday night that her grandson's moving up in the world. We at the Doris Victor Day Foundation are extremely excited to talk to you about our role in the census and what the opportunities are for philanthropy in the census. So the question is, does an accurate count matter to philanthropy? We get this a lot. Why is philanthropy concerned? If you would have asked me as an executive director of a local private foundation in January 15 of 2018, I would respond by saying, well, what's the census? So in the time that we have left, it's our hope that we'll walk you through the process of dipping our toes into the census-related stuff to the significant investment that the board of directors has made to engage, innovate, communicate, and participate all of the people who live in our community in the 2020 census. So, of course, the census should matter for philanthropy. All of the data points to the same conclusion that no matter where geographically one is located, a more accurate census ensures that every community, as well as people and households in need, receive the federal resources to which they're entitled to under all of the census-derived programs, and ensure that those who make law can be more informed in their decisions about how to allocate the dollars that's more fair and more equitable. It's also been said to us a lot, we only have one chance to get this right, and it's going to impact us for 10 years. That's really true. But I like to go, this is perhaps maybe an opportunity for philanthropy that we get to play with once every 10 years. Those of you who maybe remember that movie, My Big Fat Greek Wedding, where the father could take any word, and I'll tell you how that is derived from the Greek language. We're seeing that a little bit here locally. You find me one of our nonprofits that we fund, and I'll find a way eventually how the census is impacted by them, will impact them. So before we get going, what Gary had referred to of those 320 federal funds, they keep finding more each month. The latest figure I heard was 320 federal funds. That totals over $880 billion. That's what's going to be determined, and that gets added each day to us. So for those of you who are perhaps quickly searching GuideStar or ProPublica nonprofit to see who we are, and looking for our 990, I'll give you the quick and dirty. We're a private foundation located in Rock Island, Illinois. We fund both Illinois and Iowa, Scott counties. With $15 million in assets, we've been grant making since 1986. Our total investment in this community has been about $20 million through grants. The portfolio is like many private foundations. It ranges from education to economic development to grants that meet basic human needs and to grassroots organizations that lead in advocacy. I'm going to try to attempt to swap screens and see if it'll let me. So here's how it all started. And it started with that hard account map that Gary referred to and that study of George Washington University. This came into me from a link. And I spent all day playing around with it and discovered that in Rock Island County and in Scott County, the identified census tracts that are the most hardest to count are right next to each other in Davenport and in Rock Island, right where we currently are funding. For example, in Rock Island County, we missed about 21% or so, 28% or so of our households in 2010. Scott County had about the same figures. That report that was referred to in Iowa also spreads it out for Illinois. And when we look at this list here, most of our grant partners rely on those funds. The majority of our work that we fund usually is in these hard to count areas. So if we just count everyone, would there be more dollars for our area? For example, we have 3 community health care clinics located throughout the Quad Cities. We have 4 of them. The 3 that are located are in our most hardest to count areas, and they're reliant upon Medicare funding to help meet the needs of the people in our community. We often find grants from the community health care clinics for dental work for children, which would be covered by the Medicare program if we perhaps accurately counted everyone. Would it free opportunities up for us to fund other innovative programs if the government was fairly funding the current programs, if we get a fair count to them? I think so. In December of last month, a third report came out from the George Washington University that I think is really important for us as we talk about Iowa and expanding. They studied the 55 federal programs, that's 1 in every 6 of federal funds, that is geared towards rural areas. Here's just an example of the 6 rural assistance programs by the state in the fiscal year of 2016. Illinois has 11.5% of its population identified in rural areas. Iowa has 36%, which ranks you number 12 in the state of Iowa. And here's the big funds that you might want to look at as funders that are in perhaps rural areas, from housing to electrification of loans and guarantees to water and waste. These are big, important funds for our community. 95% of the rural funding comes from the Department of Agriculture. So if you are in an area that is very rural, the census is extremely important for you because we have also heard with new technology allows us to get data faster. In 2016, for the state of Iowa, 20% of the households either had no internet subscription or dial-up access. So not only do we have the challenges from the census before of identified hard-to-count regions, we are now realizing that the rural areas are a new hard-to-count population that we weren't expecting, and that has to do with encouraging everyone to use the internet. And later we'll talk about how the libraries have been partnering in that kind of program too, as maybe a possibility for those of you who are working in the rural communities. I really think for Iowa, the rural communities will be an important part of the census data to make sure we get a fair and accurate count. Carrie will send a link out to where this report is, and there are a couple more reports that we're expecting to come out soon. All of this information convinced me, as an executive director of the Day Foundation, that we probably should be involved in the census. But I also have a board to respond to. Presenting this data to the board was pretty simple. We want a fair and accurate count. How do we do that? We need capacity. I had no idea about the census. Maybe we should create a position to help us with this. The Rock Island, for Rock Island County, and I'll explain that asterisk in a little bit later. We need to connect with our national, state, and local efforts that philanthropy is working with on the census. This all happened within a month. Laura was hired in April of last year. My board made a decision in February to say we're all in for the census. We quickly joined up with an organization called the Funders Forum for Civic Participation and attended a conference to learn about the census. We joined Forefront, which is kind of the Iowa counterpart in Illinois, of a statewide entity that tries to engage philanthropy and nonprofits together, and the United Philanthropy Forum. We committed to investing and participating and convening a fair and accurate count. Like I said, we have Laura here part-time. We've also created an extra line item in our funding stream this year for our organizations that are currently working in our communities, as there are possible ideas they might have to help add census value work to what they're doing. And statewide, in Illinois, we are part of a pool of about a $1.8 million pool for nonprofits to request funding for statewide initiatives, because we realize that even though we're here in the Quad Cities, we know that there are funding gaps in counties around us, but it's still important for a fair and accurate count. Illinois, before we heard Illinois was at risk of losing one congressional seat. That's been given. Now we're afraid we're going to lose two. So really from the Illinois statewide standpoint, counting is extremely important, as is in any state. So the asterisk up there for Rock Island County, for those of you who are in bi-state areas like us, we have a lot of funders that will restrict their funding to one county, and due to scheduling issues of grant awards, we started quickly with Rock Island County, and we're picking up with Scott County, Iowa, with a $60,000 investment from one of the Iowa Council on Foundation board members, not board members, but members, the Regional Development Authority in Davenport, Iowa. So we're excited about how that was able to leverage some funds, and also now for us to expand our reach, because Scott County has the same problems as Rock Island County does. We are a region together, and when one does well, we all do well. Like I said, Laura Fontaine has started with us, and I'm going to hand it off to her now and let her tell you. So we've hired someone. We've been doing this for a year. Practically, how is this working in our local community? We as a funder have never been involved in any work of the census, and so we're kind of building this as we go along. Luckily, we have great partners across the state and in our national offices, and but we're the voice for the people on the ground. So Laura, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Thanks, Dave. So as Dave mentioned, past spring, the board of directors of our foundation decided to make the bold move and hired me for 2 years with one specific task, and that's to assist our community in a fair and accurate count for the 2020 census. So you got all this data and information from Dave and from Gary. So what are you going to do with it now? Basically, when I was hired, I sat down and I was like, okay, we're going to do capacity building. And I began delving into all things census relating to Rock Island County and Illinois. As Dave mentioned, I went to the Funders Committee for Civic Participation Conference, where I was able to meet Terry Lowenthal, and she is a leading census expert, so I spent a lot of time picking her brain. She's a consultant for FCCP and keeps everybody up to date, as well as other foundations from all over the country that were involved in the census in 2010. So I was able to gain a lot of knowledge on what worked and what didn't work. Minnesota and Michigan are two states that really improved their response rate by having a complete count committee, as well as philanthropic organizations getting involved with their nonprofits for the census. So those two states I would highly recommend looking at if you want to get some more information as well. In late summer, excuse me, we really hit the ground running, and we identified key stakeholders in our area, such as our congressional representatives and mayors. One afternoon, Dave was in the office, and he said, hey, let's go sit down with Representative Halpin. So we went over to his office, knocked on his door, and he's free to meet with us. And we basically said, hey, do you know what's at stake for Rock Island County? Do you know how much money that we can lose if we don't have a fair and accurate count in 2020? We also met with our mayors and what everything means in Rock Island County. So this is your opportunity to educate an elected official on the census. Another example is we invited Representative Tony McCombie a week later to speak at a community meeting, and so we gave her some info on the census. She sent us an email afterwards asking how can she get involved, how can her office get involved. So she now is engaged in a fair and accurate count and can go out and talk to her constituencies about the 2020 census. And this probably wouldn't have happened if we didn't educate and promote the 2020 census. We also presented at our MPO's quarterly meetings, the Bi-State Regional Commission's quarterly meetings, so all city and county officials were present. The media got, word that, hey, there's a foundation that hired somebody to look at the 2020 census. So local PBS featured us to talk about the census and a fair and accurate count. And then I also made meetings with Senator Duckworth and Senator Durbin's office, their local representatives here, and gave them some policy briefs and said, this is what we're looking at here in Rock Island County. This is also what's at stake in Illinois. At the state level, as Dave mentioned, we are working with Forefront, and they have a good amount of funding. They are leading our state complete count committee. So I'm up in Chicago at least once a month for different meetings with them. And around the table, there's only foundations from Chicago and then us. So they've asked us, they're using us as an example of how is a local foundation moving along and working with their nonprofits for the 2020 census outside of a big city. My suggestion also is to identify the key stakeholders in your community, everyone from, like I mentioned, the mayor to the superintendent to the executive directors of your nonprofits, to the clergy and to the libraries, and start having conversations and giving presentations. Just having one conversation with somebody over lunch and then they mention it to somebody else has opened up doors for us where people are contacting us now and saying, hey, we heard you're working on the census. What can you help us with as far as, for example, Augustana College, to work with their students and educate them, because a lot of college students don't know that, hey, they're living in Rock Island County and they need to be counted and fill out the census where they live, not where their parents live. Your nonprofits and community leaders are going to be your trusted messengers. So when they are going out and speaking to their clients, people are going to listen to them. They are the ones that they work with. Just this morning, we had a meeting with the new Rock Island County administrator, and he's going to make sure that we have an audience with the rural administrators and officials. So a simple conversation, and he's new, and we basically just gave him some educational material. Your goal should be to educate, convene, promote, and encourage your community to get involved in the census. So I guess basically overall, identify those ambassadors, identify the nonprofits that can share your message. We are really excited for our spring event with the senators, as well as forming the Complete Count Committee. And to echo what Gary had said, the CCC is an open and inclusive, speaks the languages of all the communities within, and builds trust by encouraging awareness of the importance of an accurate census count. And we're hoping the Complete Count Committee is going to be charged with developing and implementing a plan designed to target the unique characteristics of our Quad Cities region or of, your community. And I think Dave's going to add some things here.
Thanks, Laura. We're just going to wrap up for a second. I just want to make a couple comments going back to why would this matter to philanthropy. It's been stated that the census is the largest peacetime endeavor that a country undertakes every 10 years. We like to talk about foundations. One of our greatest assets we have is the power to convene. So every 10 years, we get the opportunity as philanthropy leaders in our community to flex those convening power muscles we have and pull together the most diverse group of stakeholders that we ever have. We only get one every 10 years to be able to do this, to say we all need to work together to ensure that we all count, because if you believe in your community, The community members that live in your community matter, and let's make sure we can fairly get them counted. When we take that approach, what's the one entity you would go to that could convene a great, diverse group of people that's independent and that is also there as a supportive role? I would probably first call a community foundation or a local foundation that is involved in my community. One thing that we've heard is that foundations can form their own complete count committees and take over the reins of organizing. One thing we have discovered here locally that is a challenge is how do you sell this to the nonprofits that you currently fund without adding more work to them in an already stressed budget? That's where the creative work gets to come into play. Where if you're funding an after-school program that's really tight with staff, perhaps you might want to help them with their parent engagement issue they're having. And by the way, with that parent engagement person you hired, do you mind having them be the census person for us that will come to the complete count committees that will help find ways to integrate the census work into what they're doing already after school? Children are a hard-to-count population. So how can we be able to get our nonprofits to be able to partner with us in a way that they see their self-interest in it as well, as opposed to more money for them? Carrie?
Great. I think you landed on a really good point there, Dave. There's strategies, of course, through the grant-making role of the community or a foundation, but there's also the convening power of foundations and the ability to work with your existing grantee partners to integrate this into their existing work. So I thank you for sharing that. I might just ask, there are some other foundations in the state of Illinois that you've been working really closely with. Have you seen any, innovative strategies that might be useful for funders to think about in our state?
Sure. And, I preface this. I'm assuming that I don't want to make the assumption that anyone on this webinar hasn't participated in the census in terms of your role in philanthropy. I've been in philanthropy for 5 years, so this is my first experience with philanthropy being involved in the census. And perhaps there's some on this call that might want to share with their experience from 2010. Forgive me if I failed to mention that earlier. What we are finding here locally with some of our local nonprofits or local funders in terms of collaboration, I think was the question. You'll notice there's a little gap in our movement into Scott County, Iowa. It took some time for us as a foundation with our relationships with our colleagues to help bring them to the table in terms of philanthropy. You should be concerned about the census 2020 and finding every way to encourage people. It took a lot of networking and not convincing, I wouldn't say, but where we are today, it really took us to be who's going to be the person that's going to be able to go out and say, the census matters, and funders, let's get behind the table. So I think really our key investment kind of is encouraging others to kind of come to the table. We won't really know in terms of the state of Illinois what creative, innovative things that we'll see, but we do know we're starting to see our libraries in Rock Island County that normally don't work with each other coming around the table to work on this one issue. What could happen if we do a great job of getting 90% of our community counted? We had 81% in 2010. What if we got to 90? And the libraries were key and vital to that. What might they want to do in 2021 since they already were able to experience something that they were able to accomplish and be part of? They're in relationship now. They're working together. That's my hope of what will happen with our involvement in the census.
And can you share a little bit more about, I think you had talked with me about a mobile van that would be purchased by one of the libraries and how that would be engaged with this work?
So we do know from the city of Rock Island that the long-term plan for our local library is to have a mobile library. They're across the country. It's the way that libraries are engaged in their outreach effort. It's going to cost about $200,000 for this mobile library. We're currently in conversations with a state Illinois grant and with some funding from us about what if we perhaps went together and partnered with the Rock Island Library, and for the next 18 months that mobile library we were able to leverage and purchase becomes the census mobile for the next 18 months. And when we are able to use that to drive to our rural areas, to have mobile internet days to come and fill out your census, in 18 months we'll be done with the bus, and perhaps, I don't know, there might be a library in Rock Island that might want to take that and renovate that into a mobile library. there's a little self-interest on both sides. We get to use the bus and drive around in our rural communities in Scott County and Rock Island County, have days where people can come and bring their cards and fill out their PIN and do the census, and us to connect with someone and saying, thank you so much for coming to count. We are glad you're part of this community. And the Rock Island Library gets a mobile library bus for half the cost of what they expected they had to pay.
Great. Thanks for sharing.
That's the fun we're having in philanthropy, is how we can find ways that the nonprofits see their self-interest and see an ability to, yeah, I can integrate the census for that.
Very good. Gary, I'm going to unmute your line. I had a couple questions come in, so you can respond, or Dave or Laura can respond. The first, and this is probably to you, Gary, and Dave, you might know as well, is if there are statistics available about the undercounts in 2010 in the urban areas in Iowa that people would be able to access.
Yes and no. It's out there. It's not easy to find. I saw that question, so I was doing some digging to see if I could just get the spreadsheet to come up, and I can't find it right now, but I can do some digging on that and see if I can get it. I do know in those mapping, on my site I have a couple different hard to count area mappers that you can look at, and some of the data elements that they include in determining a hard to count area is response rates from 2010. So you can look at some of those maps and also determine the areas that didn't count, that were hard to count areas in 2010 and moving forward to 2020. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes. Dave, is that yours?
Oh, yeah, sorry. To piggyback on that, one thing we've used is the Census Hard to Count map 2020 here. You can pull up your county or by congressional districts, state legislative, and click on, so he just pulled up Grundy County, where the response rate was 88.1% in 2010. So enumerators had to go out into the field, to get the remaining. And then if you go below, these are the hard to count communities, everybody from immigrants, low income, ESL learners, children, single parent households. And these are historically the groups of people that have been undercounted. So from my knowledge is that this is how described as hard to count census tracts. So you can look up your individual county.
Great.
And a 1% undercount for the state of Illinois, for example, a 1% undercount will result in about $1 billion in losses of federal funding that are entitled to the people who live in our community. We just didn't count them. So even a 1%, if you can increase your response rate and get 1% of the population, it's still going to be a good win for the community.
The second question that came in is, what might a budget look like for a complete count committee in a local community? And I would add a second part to that question, how are local complete count committees typically financed? Gary, maybe you could weigh in on that.
I don't know how the locals, how they're financed on the local side. I mean, obviously that's determined by the entity that's establishing it. If it's a city government who's establishing the complete count committee, they may allocate funds. I can tell you, on my side, I don't get any funds. So if the state does a complete count committee, it's going to be something that I'll be doing in conjunction with my other duties. So there, in a lot of cases, we don't allocate, at least again on the state level, we don't allocate additional funds for the 2020 census or the 2010 census. Yeah.
So from the role of foundations and philanthropy, this is where, we can step up, and we're looking at, leading the Complete Count Committee for the county here, and we're working with a local marketing person. So we're giving some discretionary funds from our grants to develop a logo, to develop a complete count committee handbook, a kind of a guidebook. So I guess to answer your question, it would be from the foundations or the one who's leading it, but there isn't just random money, out there for complete count committees locally that we have found.
I can say, and I can't speak for 2020 yet, but in 2000 and in 2010, the Census Bureau did have a small amount of money, grants that were available to states, communities, cities, as far as developing promotional materials. If you wanted to make mugs or buttons or something like that. I mean, it wasn't a lot of money, but complete count committees or areas could apply for the money from the Census Bureau. I think they're hopeful that will be available in 2020. They just can't promise it yet.
And as we wait for that, as local philanthropists, we talk about civic participation, civic engagement. A small little investment of less than $1,000 is giving us the ability to brand that the Quad Cities count. You count. If you live in Rock Island County or Scott County, in this area, you count and you matter. That's a small investment on us, but it's going to make a big impact in terms of how we move forward and brand. So we can make quick grants quickly. Hopefully you all can too. But this is a way to get your foot in the door also as, hey, we're here and we're all in. What do we need to do? Let's free up some funding perhaps to brand this. Or perhaps we have staff members that in our own offices that do design work type of stuff. What can we take on that will help be an added benefit to our local communities? We're here to partner. We're not here to lead or to take over. Let's partner.
And a final question that just came in is if it's too late to start organizing to form a local complete count committee, or what the timeline might look like to have a target date to have that established and process in place.
So no, it's not too late to get a complete count committee started. And the first thing I would say is identify the leadership team you want to have. And maybe Gary, you want to chime in. I know that I spoke to somebody at the regional office, the Census Bureau office, and they suggested doing it at the county level, but I do think that there are individual cities that are doing it. We've chosen to do it at the county level, though.
Yeah, I mean, I think it obviously depends on the area. The bigger the community, the more. Like Des Moines will have a complete count committee. Iowa City is going to do it. Cedar Rapids will have one. The smaller rural county areas will probably. It makes much more sense to be looking to establish a complete count committee on the county level. But it's not something that has to be horribly formal. It can be as formal as you want it to be, or it can be as informal as you want it to be. But really, the idea, what the Census Bureau wants to promote, and they have toolkits and training kits on establishing complete count committees, is just getting everyone in the same room together and to talk about the census and figuring out what we need to do in our area to ensure that the count is as accurate as possible. And so, it's definitely not too late to start a complete count committee. Obviously, as I mentioned, the state has not set up their statewide one yet. I know that the regional office is just now, they've been working on it for the last probably 6-7 months for sure, going around trying to get complete count committees started. So it's not too late to reach out to either the regional office in Chicago or just your local communities and find out what's going on in our area in regards to preparation for the 2020 census and how can I help.
And now is the time to do it. One thing we heard from 2010 from communities and reading evaluations is that we got our complete count committee, we got that pulled together too late. We should have started earlier. This is the time, I think, for us as the Bureau is figuring out what the answers are going to be for us to be engaged, start talking about forming a central count committee. You're going to be far ahead than a lot of other communities if we start doing this now.
Great. And we did have a question about who the contact might be for the Linn County Committee. Gary, would that be something that might be available on the list you get from your?
Yeah, I sent an email out. I'm sure I haven't gotten anything back yet. No, but I did ask for a list of the complete count committees that have been established or will be established, or that he knows is going to be established in Iowa, And then I asked if I could have that list and if I could share it. So once I hear from Kelly, I will let you know.
Okay, great. So we'll stay tuned, and if you can pass that along, I'll get it out to the folks on the webinar today as well.
Sure.
Great, thanks. All right, well, we are nearing the end of our time, so thanks much to Gary and Dave and Laura for this great webinar today and sharing all of this helpful information. Please feel free, if you're on the webinar, to contact me if you have any future items related to this issue that you'd like to discuss with other ICoF members and funders across the state, either in this type of learning format or another. We will be sending a short evaluation along with the slides in a webinar recording back to the group, and appreciate your feedback and interest in exploring this topic further. As a reminder, a full listing of our upcoming webinars and in-person meetings are available on the ICoF website. We have another webinar about opportunity zones happening this Thursday at 2 p.m. with Adam Northup from Locust Impact Investing that has been specifically designed for community foundations, but I think other funders would benefit from the learning as well. It's an exciting opportunity under the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act for communities and as a local investment vehicle. Lots of things are still being determined from a regulatory standpoint, but Adam has a lot of information about strategies that are being used across the country. So we'll hope that you can join us for that. And our quarterly membership meeting is on January 31st at the Wellmark Foundation offices, and we'll hear from our colleagues at GEO about their participatory grant-making strategies and trends they've been seeing across the country. So thanks, everyone, for joining us, and hope everyone has a great afternoon. Take good care. Bye-bye.